He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Hand over the deed, old man. You've had your time in that house." That was my son's wife, at my son's engagement party, in my own dining room. 32 people heard her say it, and my son, my only son, the boy I raised alone after his mother died. He just stood there, swirling his wine, like she'd asked me to pass the bread. My name is Malcolm Finch. I am 67 years old. I built a construction company in Mississauga from a single pickup truck and a line of credit I was terrified to sign. I poured concrete in January. I framed houses in August, heat that made my eyes sting. I did it for 41 years, and when my wife Helena got sick, pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that doesn't negotiate, I sold the company so I could sit beside her bed every single day until the end. She passed on a Tuesday morning in November. Snow was falling. I remember because I watched it through the hospital window while the nurse pulled the sheet up, and I thought Helena would have called this beautiful. That was 6 years ago. I kept our house in Oakville. 4 bedrooms, a garden she designed herself, a workshop in the basement where I still fix things nobody asks me to fix. The house was paid off. I had the proceeds from the sale of my company sitting in a trust, plus my RRSP, plus a rental property on Lakeshore. I was comfortable, not flashy. I drove a 10-year-old F-150. I ate dinner at the same Italian place on Kerr Street every Friday. I didn't need anyone to take care of me. But I did need my son. Keith was 34. He'd gone to Western for business, graduated middle of his class, got a job at a marketing firm in Toronto. It was fine. He made decent money. Not great money, not the kind of money that buys a house in the GTA, but enough to rent a nice condo in Liberty Village and eat out 3 times a week. I helped him here and there, co-signed his first car loan, covered his student line of credit when he graduated, gave him money for a trip to Portugal with his friends. Normal parent things. Or at least I thought they were normal. He met Amber Hollis at a rooftop bar in King West. She was 29, worked in PR, had a smile that could open doors and a way of talking that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I liked her when I first met her. She complimented Helena's garden. She asked about the photos on the mantel. She called me Mr. Billizo, Finch for the first 3 months. Then it became Malcolm, then it became something else entirely. The shift happened gradually, the way rot works inside a wall. You don't see it until the whole thing buckles. It started with comments. Small ones. "This house is so big for one person, Malcolm. Don't you get lonely? And Keith says you hardly use the upstairs bedrooms. That seems like such a waste." And my personal favorite, delivered while she was looking at Helena's reading chair by the bay window. "Have you ever thought about downsizing? A nice condo might be easier to manage at your age." At my age. I was 65 when she said that. I could still carry a sheet of plywood up a flight of stairs. I had just re-shingled my own garage roof. But to Amber, I was already a man who needed to be managed. Reduced, moved to a smaller container. I let it go. I let it go because Keith seemed happy and because after Helena, I'd promised myself I wouldn't be the kind of father who drove people away. Helena used to say, "Malcolm, you fight everything like it's a job site. Not everything needs a foreman." She was right. She was always right. So I softened. I smiled. I changed the subject. When Keith told me he was going to propose, I offered to pay for the ring. He said Amber wanted a specific one. Cushion cut. 2 carats. Platinum band. I looked up the price. $14,000. I didn't blink. I wrote the check. Then came the engagement party. Keith asked if we could host it at my house. Your place is perfect at. The garden, the space, the kitchen. Amber's been dreaming about it. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I hired a caterer from Burlington. I had the garden professionally landscaped. I bought new patio furniture. I even had Helena's old greenhouse cleaned out and strung with lights because Amber once mentioned she liked the look of it. The bill for the party came to $11,000. I paid it without a word. 32 people came. Amber's parents, the Hollises, drove down from Barrie in a new BMW. Her father, a retired insurance broker, shook my hand and said, "Beautiful property, Malcolm. What do you think this is worth now?" 225? 3? I told him I hadn't checked. He smiled like I told a joke. The evening was warm, late June. The garden looked the way Helena always imagined it would for something like this. I stood at the edge of the patio with a glass of rye and watched my son put his arm around Amber and laugh at something her mother said. And for a moment I felt like maybe everything was going to be fine. It was not going to be fine. The moment happened around 9 o'clock. People were moving between the garden and the living room. I was in the kitchen refilling the ice bucket when Amber walked in. She was holding her phone, and she had a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Hard, purposeful, like she'd rehearsed what she was about to say. "Malcolm, we need to talk about the house." I set the ice bucket down. "What about it?" "Keith and I have been talking. When we're married, we want to start a family. This house is perfect for that. 5 minutes from good schools, big yard, quiet street. And honestly, Malcolm, it's too much house for you. You know that." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Amber, this is my home." "I know, and we're not saying right away. But we think it makes sense for you to transfer the deed to Keith. You could move into the basement apartment, or we could help you find a condo nearby. We've actually looked at a few in Bronte. One bedroom's very nice. You'd love it." She said this like she was selling me a vacation package. Like I should be grateful. "I'm not transferring my house to anyone," I said. Her smile dropped, not slowly. It fell off her face like a mask being removed. "Malcolm, be reasonable. You're sitting on a $3 million property by yourself. Keith is your only heir. This is going to be his eventually. Why make everyone wait?" "Because I'm not dead, Amber." "That's dramatic." "Is it?" She stared at me for a long 5 seconds. Then she turned and walked into the living room. I thought that was the end of it. I picked up the ice bucket and followed her out. She was standing in the middle of the room. She had everyone's attention. I don't know how she gathered it so fast. Maybe she clinged to glass. Maybe she just had that kind of presence. But every face in the room was turned toward her, including Keith's. "I just want to say something," Amber said, and her voice was sweet, the PR voice, the one that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. "Keith and I are so excited to start this next chapter, and we're especially grateful to Malcolm for offering to give us this beautiful home as a wedding gift. It means the world to us." The room erupted in applause. I stood in the doorway holding an ice bucket, and 32 people clapped because they believed I had just given away my house. I didn't yell. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But Helena's voice was in my head. Not everything needs a foreman. And I set the ice bucket down on the counter, and I walked through the applause like a man walking through water. I went to Keith. He was smiling. He was clapping, too. "Did you know about this?" I asked him. He leaned in close. "Dad, just go with it. We'll sort it out later. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene." In my house. At a party I paid for. After his fiancée just announced to 32 people that I was giving away the home I built with his mother. I looked at Amber. She was watching me from across the room with a look that said, "What are you going to do, old man? Correct me in front of everyone?" That's when she walked up to me. She put her hand on my arm, leaned in like she was giving me a hug, and whispered, "Hand over the deed, old man. You've had your time in that house." Then she pulled back, smiled for the room, and kissed me on the cheek. I left. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't make a speech. I walked out the back door, through Helena's garden, past the greenhouse with the string lights, and I got in my truck and I drove. I ended up in the parking lot of the Tim Hortons on Spears Road. It was 9:47 at night. I sat there with the engine running, and I called the one person I trusted absolutely, Nadine Lefebvre, my lawyer. She'd handled the sale of my company, set up my trust, done my will. She was sharp, she was calm, and she didn't waste words. Malcolm, it's almost 10 o'clock. I know. I need your help. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then she said, "Come to my office tomorrow at 8. Don't talk to Keith before then. Don't talk to Amber. Don't answer any texts. Go home and lock your doors. They might still be there. Then go to a hotel. There's a Hilton on Dorval. I'll call ahead." I slept at the Hilton that night. I didn't sleep well. I lay in that hotel bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about Keith as a boy, riding on my shoulders at Wonderland, falling asleep in the truck on the way home from hockey practice, standing beside me at Helena's funeral with his jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle working. I thought about the day he graduated, and how I sat in the audience at Alumni Hall and cried into my hands because Helena wasn't there to see it. And I thought about him saying, "Don't make a scene." By 8 the next morning, I was in Nadine's office on Lakeshore with a coffee I couldn't drink and a feeling in my stomach like the floor had been removed. Nadine had already pooled everything: the trust documents, the property title, the co-signed car loan, the credit line I'd set up for Keith when he started his business, a small marketing side hustle that had never actually turned a profit. She laid it all out on the table like a surgeon laying out instruments. "Here is where you stand," she said. "The house is in your name, always has been. The trust holds your investments and the rental income. Keith is named as beneficiary in your will, but you can change that any time. The car loan you co-signed, that's a liability. The credit line, same. He's drawn $42,000 on it in the last 18 months. $42,000. Did you not check the statements?" I hadn't. I'd set it up and trusted him. The way you trust your son. Nadine folded her hands. "Malcolm, what do you want to do?" "I want to protect my house. I want to understand what my son's been doing with my money, and I want to make sure that woman never speaks to me that way again." "Then here's what we do." She walked me through it step by step. The house would be placed into a living trust, my trust, with a provision that it could never be transferred without my written, notarized consent and an independent legal review. The credit line would be frozen immediately. The co-signed car loan. I would notify the bank that I wanted to be removed as guarantor, which would trigger a credit review for Keith. And the will. Nadine suggested I not make any changes yet. "You're angry," she said. "Angry people make permanent decisions. Give it 60 days. I agreed to 60 days on the will. Everything else I wanted done that morning. By noon, it was done. The credit line was frozen. The trust was amended. The house was locked behind more legal protection than a bank vault. I drove home, and the first thing I did was change the locks. All of them. Front door, back door, garage, side gate. A locksmith from Milton came out and did it in under 2 hours. Then I went into the living room, and I looked at the spot where Amber had stood and told 32 people that my house was her wedding gift. My phone had 19 missed calls, 14 from Keith, 5 from Amber. There were texts too. "Keith, Dad, what happened? Where did you go? Keith, Dad, please call me back." Keith, "Amber says you misunderstood her. She was just excited." Amber, "Malcolm, I think there's been a miscommunication. Can we talk?" Amber, "I didn't mean to upset you. I just got carried away." Carried a respond. I made myself a sandwich and I sat in Helena's chair and I ate it slowly, looking out the bay window at the garden. Then I opened the security camera app on my iPad. I'd had cameras installed 2 years ago after a break-in scare on the street, and I checked the footage from the party. The cameras caught everything. The living room camera had audio. I watched Amber make her announcement. I watched the applause. I watched my own face, the way I went white, the way I held that ice bucket like it was the only thing keeping me upright. And I watched Amber lean in and whisper to me. You couldn't hear the words on the recording, but you could see her lips move, and you could see my face afterward. I saved the footage. I sent it to Nadine. 3 days passed. Keith finally showed up at the house on a Thursday evening. He pulled into the driveway in the Audi I co-signed for and walked up to the front door. I watched on the camera. He tried his key. It didn't work. He knocked. I opened the door but didn't step aside. Dad, can I come in? No. What do you mean, no? I mean no, Keith. You can't come in. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. The irony of that expression was not lost on me. Dad, Amber feels terrible. She didn't mean. Your fiancée told 32 people I was giving away my house. Then she whispered in my ear that I should hand over the deed because I've had my time. And you told me not to make a scene. In my own house. At a party I paid for. He opened his mouth and closed it again. Then he said the thing I'd been dreading, the thing that told me exactly how far gone he was. Dad, why do you always have to make everything about you? I closed the door. He knocked for 15 minutes. I sat in the kitchen and listened to it. Eventually he stopped. I heard the Audi start and pull away. The following week, I got a call from Amber's father, Derek Hollis. He introduced himself as though we'd never met, all formal and smooth. The insurance broker voice, and he said he wanted to mediate the situation. There's nothing to mediate, I said. Malcolm, Amber is devastated. She feels like she's lost a father figure. She can feel however she wants. She announced a gift I never offered and then demanded my home. That's not a misunderstanding, Derek. That's a plan. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I understand you frozen Keith's credit line, so that's why he was calling. That's between me and my son. Keith is marrying my daughter. His financial stability affects her. Then perhaps your daughter should have thought about that before she told a room full of people she was taking my house. He hung up. I poured myself a rye and sat on the back porch and watched the sun go down over the garden, and I didn't feel guilty, not one bit. The wedding was scheduled for September, a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a winery with a view of the escarpment. Keith had asked me months earlier to contribute to the wedding fund. I'd agreed to cover the catering and the venue, roughly $55,000 total. I'd already put down a deposit of $15,000. After the engagement party, I called the venue. I called the caterer. I informed them both that I was withdrawing my financial commitment. The deposits were non-refundable, and I told them to keep the money. I wasn't going to fight over $15,000, but the remaining $40,000, that stayed in my account. Keith found out a week later. The venue called him to say the balance was no longer being covered by a third party. He called me 17 times in one afternoon. I answered on the 18th. Dad, you can't do this. I already did. The wedding is in 3 months. We can't afford that venue without your help. Then find another venue. Amber's already sent the invitations. 120 people. That's not my problem, Keith. There was a silence so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he said, Mom would be ashamed of you. My hand tightened on the phone so hard the case cracked. I felt it split under my thumb. Your mother, I said, and my voice was steady even though something inside me was not. would have been ashamed of a son who stood by while his fiancée disrespected his father in his own home. Your mother would have been ashamed of a man who couldn't say that's wrong when it mattered. Don't you ever use her name to guilt me. Not ever. I hung up. I went into the basement workshop and I sat at the bench where I used to build birdhouses with Keith when he was 8 years old, and I cried. Not for long. Maybe 5 minutes. But I cried the way you cry when you realize your child has become someone you don't recognize. September came. The wedding happened. I wasn't invited. Or rather, I was uninvited. Amber sent me a formal note, printed on cream-colored cardstock, informing me that given the current tensions, it would be best for everyone if you did not attend. She signed it with both their names. I spent that Saturday in my workshop. I built a small wooden box, cedar, dovetailed joints, a lid that closed with a soft click. I don't know why I built it. I just needed my hands to do something while my heart did something else. A month after the wedding, I got the call from Nadine. Keith applied for a line of credit with TD. They contacted me because you're still listed as a reference on his previous applications. I told them I couldn't provide any information. But Malcolm, he listed your address as his own. He what? He put your Oakville address on the credit application as his residence. I sat down. Can he do that? He can write anything on a form. Whether it constitutes fraud depends on intent. But Malcolm, this is a red flag. If he's claiming your address, he may be trying to establish residency. If Amber's involved, this could be the beginning of a legal strategy. What kind of strategy? The kind where they argue they'll be living with you, contributing to the household, and have a claim to the property. It's not easy to pull off in Ontario, but it's not impossible if they can build a paper trail. My blood went cold. Not hot, cold. The kind of cold that comes when you realize someone isn't just being selfish. They're being strategic. What do I do? We've already protected the house in the trust. That's your first line of defense. But I want to send a formal cease and desist to Keith and Amber, and I want to file a correction with TD. And Malcolm, I think it's time to update the will. I didn't wait 60 days. I went to her office that afternoon. I removed Keith as sole beneficiary. I split the estate 60% to the Oakville Hospital Foundation, where Helena had been treated, 20% to a scholarship fund at Sheridan College for trade students, 20% to Keith, but held in trust administered by Nadine, not accessible until he was 50, and only then if he could demonstrate financial independence. When I signed the new will, Nadine asked me if I was sure. I'm sure. He's going to find out eventually. I know. And it will be permanent in his mind. Even if you change it later, he'll know this version existed. I looked at her. Nadine, my son used his dead mother's memory to try to guilt me into silence. His wife announced the theft of my home like it was a toast. And now he's putting my address on credit applications. I am not punishing him. I am protecting myself. There's a difference. She nodded. She notarized the documents. I drove home. It's been 4 months since then. Keith hasn't called in 6 weeks. I heard from a mutual friend, my old foreman's wife, that the wedding went over budget, and that Keith and Amber are renting a 1-bedroom in Etobicoke. She said, Keith looked thin. She said he didn't mention me. I think about him every day. Every single day. I think about the boy who used to hand me nails while I built the garden fence. The teenager who burned pancakes on Mother's Day because he wanted to surprise Helena and set off the smoke detector at 6 in the morning. And she laughed so hard she spilled her coffee. The young man who called me from London, Ontario during his first week at university and said, Dad, I think I'm in over my head. And I told him, so was I when I started. You figure it out. I think about all of that. And then I think about the look on Amber's face when she whispered to me, and the silence from my son when he should have spoken. I still live in the house. Helena's garden is blooming. The greenhouse has new glass panels I installed myself last weekend. Her reading chair is still by the bay window. I sit in it sometimes in the evening when the light comes through just right, and I talk to her. I tell her I'm sorry it came to this. I tell her I tried. I tell her the garden looks beautiful. And then I lock the doors, all of them, every night, with keys that belong to no one but me. And I ask you, is your own child choose someone else's ambition over your dignity in your own home, in front of people you'd welcome to your table? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done?